Thank you all for being here to think about climate change on a Saturday morning it wasn't beach weather yesterday, but we've got almost beach weather today. So it means a lot to me, and it gives me hope to see so many people here wanting to engage with this issue. And I think we've got a really fantastic panel lined up. I first got into climate change like 2005-ish, and then in 2007, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth film came out. He came to Australia, which is where I was born, and at the age of 21, I met Al Gore and I learned the Inconvenient Truth slideshow, and then that following year I gave it 50 times in my community to all different audiences, about 10,000 people cumulatively in all of those presentations. And at the time, we were trying to convince people climate change is real and it's serious. And I think the video shows today, okay, it is real, it is serious. Now we're at the point of the discussion on climate, not is this real and should we act on it, but how should we act on it? How should we respond to it? And what role do we all have to play? And so I think our three panelists today are going to do a really great job of bringing three very different perspectives to that discussion. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first panelist, Stephanie Arnold. Stephanie is the climate specialist with CLIMAtlantic. She works alongside communities, organizations, sectors, and governments on using adaptation pathways, building accountability in climate adaptation, and bringing together different perspectives to address climate, environmental, and social challenges. Born in Hong Kong when it was an active British colony, and currently living, and this is Stephanie's phrasing, currently living, and it's beautiful phrasing, living uninvited on unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq homelands in Epikwit. They strive to center reconciliation, community building, and systems change in their work. Centering disruptive kindness has given meaning and purpose to their chemical engineering degree, MBA, and ongoing PhD studies. Ulnue awarded Stephanie the Reconciliation Recognition Award in 2024 for their work in challenging climate change funders, collaborators, experts, and practitioners to scrutinize whether their efforts were reinforcing settler colonial power imbalances or supporting treaty rights, truth, and reconciliation. Welcome to the stage, Stephanie. And before we get into the full panel discussion, I'm going to ask one question of each of our panelists. So I noticed in your bio and also in your LinkedIn profile that you use this phrase, disruptive kindness. And I wanted to just ask, what does disruptive kindness mean to you, and why do you center that in your personal identity?
I think kindness often inherently is disruptive, but I'm using that intentionally in the phrase because sometimes we might mix up niceness and kindness. Niceness to me is really like, don't rock the boat, everyone feels comfortable in the space, but it might not be the thing that we really need when challenging conversations or challenging actions need to be taken. And so for me, centering disruptive kindness isn't really about, well, I was told to do this. I was told that this project means this. And so it's really scrutinizing, is this the best project that we could do? Is this benefiting the community? Is this benefiting nature? And if it isn't, lead with kindness and find out how can you be disruptive? Sometimes overtly, sometimes discreetly, but always with, I think, good intention and kind intentions at heart.
Beautiful, thank you. So creative disruption, I love it, beautiful. Okay, next I will introduce Kim Griffin. Kim is a familiar face to many of us. She is the Director of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs with Maritime Electric. Kim has worked at Maritime Electric for over 15 years. I think it's actually 20 this year. And has led her team through many weather events. She has helped PEI through major storms, including most recently Hurricane Fiona. She sees firsthand the impacts of climate change and the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. She's also led Maritime Electric's new climate adaptation strategy. An active community volunteer, she is currently a director with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Queen Elizabeth Hospital Foundation, and the Greater Charlottetown Chamber of Commerce as past president. She's received many awards and lots of public recognition for her work and her leadership. She holds a Bachelor of Public Relations and a Master of Business Administration with distinction. Welcome to the stage, Kim. Good morning, thank you. Last year, the Electricity Canada Association awarded you the Face of the Electricity Industry Award. And I think this was in recognition of your work communicating with the island public in the wake of Hurricane Fiona. And that was something that all of us here on PEI experienced as a collective traumatic bonding experience. And it was definitely watched across the whole country as well. So how did that feel, having that very heavy, weighty responsibility of communicating and informing the public when we were all feeling powerless while being electrically powerless as well?
Well, thanks for that question. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us your Saturday morning. It's interesting to think about climate change and storms, and I must say that I just do my job, just like everybody else that I work with, and the many colleagues that I work with were just trying to get the power on as fast as they could. So sometimes I feel funny to get an award for that because people were having such a hard time. But what was really interesting is that when we look back at Fiona, and at the time I didn't really notice it, but when we looked at the engagement from across the country, we had over 20 million people watching and trying to understand and see the effects of Hurricane Fiona on Prince Edward Island. So I was astounded by the numbers and the engagement, and it was not only islanders, it was visitors, it was tourists, it was people that have visited here in the past and felt a great connection to our island. So I found that very heartwarming, actually, to have that kind of feeling and that effect. And it was almost like the country had nestled us in many ways and were watching us. And we had customers calling 24 hours a day, even before Fiona hit, that were lonely and wanted to understand from a readiness and how to be prepared and what they should do. So I find it funny, too, that when you think about storms, most people that I see at the grocery store think that if there's not a storm that I'm not working. So it's kind of funny because I do other things, but known for that. And so I think we just work really hard so that people understand what is happening in the moment when there's an event like that, and hopefully trying to reassure them as much as we can.
Thank you very much, Kim. Okay, and finally to the stage, I'll welcome Melissa Peter-Paul. Melissa is an award-winning quill artist from Abequit First Nation, located here on Epiquet, PEI. Growing up, she was immersed in cultural teachings and was surrounded by a family of basket makers. Her artistic expression began at a young age, making regalia and beadwork, and she is skilled in both traditional and contemporary styles. Her exposure to other Mi'kmaq art forms led her to quillwork, a traditional skill in which the ancestors of her maternal grandfather excelled. Melissa was accepted into an apprenticeship with Mi'kmaq quill art in 2015. She learned techniques and protocols related to harvesting raw materials, porcupine quills, birch bark, spruce root, sweetgrass, as well as the complex geometry of traditional design work. Upon completion of her apprenticeship, Melissa has been integral in establishing a community of skilled quill workers. The community of quillers seeks to expand awareness of the art form and recently began working on collaborative projects together. She launched her professional career as a quill artist 6 years ago in 2019. She's heavily influenced by 20th century Mi'kmaq quill work, and she is supported in harvesting efforts by her family. She's proud to be passing the art on to her 2 sons and the broader community. So welcome, Melissa. Now, we heard on yesterday afternoon's panel, which was about restoring dialogue in the age of polarization and what we can do to strengthen democracy. We heard a lot from that panel about the importance of getting offline and engaging with our communities, practicing art, eating together, being in nature together. And it struck me when we were preparing for this panel how rooted in family and community your art is. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about the importance of family and community in your artistic practice.
Well, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Weliexit Bug. That means good morning in my language, my Mi'kmaq language. I have been doing quill work for 11 years now, but I have been creative, making all sorts of art since maybe I was about 8, I think, is when I first started doing beadwork. So for 11 years now, I've been introducing and teaching my family about quill work, and we're all harvesting all of the materials that we need together. And I think that's one of my most favorite parts of the art is getting the materials and being out, you know, in the woods, by the river with my family and making those connections with the family and strengthen our family and that strength with Mother Earth too. So yeah, the most important part I think about my art is, you know, what we take from Mother Earth, but also what we give back to her too.
Thank you very much. So diving into, I sort of want to take an arc from like the past, the present, and the future here. So I wanted to ask each of you, and maybe I'll start with Melissa, is there a time or the first time that you started to see your work as connected with climate change as an issue, or how do you see that connection?
So last year, I was working on an exhibit with my quill sisters for the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, and we had to create a piece that was like a reaction to climate change. And I remember thinking like, okay, I have to think, how many years ahead am I thinking that I'm not gonna have these materials that I need to make my art? I'm like, would it be 10 years? Would it be 20? And that made me really emotional. You know, I'm at the dollar store picking up these materials, like, how can I make my art? And I don't buy my art supplies in a store, right? I harvest all of my materials with my family. At certain time of the year, we harvest each one of these items. So, and we only take what we need. So when I was making that piece and trying to like recreate something so beautiful and something so natural and so ancient from dollar store items, right? It was so emotional. And I remember working on this piece and it taken so long for me to get it completed. I think I completed it the night before because that connection to the materials wasn't there, right? That connection to the land, connection to family, it wasn't there. And I really struggled making that piece. It turned out beautiful, but to me it just looked like paper straws, right? So it was that sad reality of like, okay, I need to start documenting each one of my works and making sure that my children and my grandchildren have something to learn off of. And maybe I need to keep this piece instead of sell it because like, what if there's no more birch bark? You know, right now there is a disease on the tree that we're having struggles with harvesting bark that doesn't have the disease. So, but yeah, that I think that straw piece that I made, and when I see it, I just feel heartbroken when I see it, and I just think about my ancestors, and I'm doing everything that I can to harvest correctly and to teach other people in my family or in other Mi'kmaq communities about how to harvest correctly and how to get those teachings to do it, right? So yeah, I think that piece that I made in the art gallery is that is my question, my answer.
Thank you very much. I'm struggling. Do I respond to I've got one aspect that I want to share is that in my climate journey, I came into climate change from a very carbon emissions reduction perspective. I was a science student, I did physics and maths, and I read a book about climate change, and it said, okay, there's a certain carbon budget in the world, and we need to reduce our emissions by this much by this date, or we fail, and so win and lose. And then I started working on climate change, and I became part of a community of people who'd been thinking about this issue for many decades before me. And over the now 2 decades that I've been working in the sector, I realized it's not just about the math of carbon emission reduction. It's about society, it's about values, it's about culture. And one of the things that I learned is how deeply colonial cultures and settler culture and white supremacist cultures have been responsible for driving climate the degradation of our global climate. If you look at those countries around the world with the highest carbon emissions, they tend to be countries like Canada. We are the highest per capita emissions in the world in this country. And it's inherently linked with a culture of supremacy over the land, and also where we think it's okay to sacrifice some areas of the land, or to sacrifice the quality of our atmosphere, or to sacrifice some entire cultures and peoples for the benefit of others or for the benefit of the short term. And so I think that the link has been made now between colonization and the essential action of decolonization in also addressing climate change. And I think the resurgence of Indigenous art that you're responsible for here on the island, you're such a leader in this area, is a huge contribution to completing the truth and reconciliation process and working us towards healing. So thank you for your work. Yeah. So I'll move to Kim. So what was the first time that you felt engaged with climate change, or you saw yourself as part of the solutions on this issue?
Well, I think I'll back up to say that I'm a passionate islander. I grew up in rural PEI, and my family to this day still lives in Blooming Point. And I think for growing up, that was always a big part of our life. And I don't think I really realized it until probably some of the early ice storms in 2008. Then we had Hurricane Dorian, number of snowstorms and ice storms in between. And then I think probably about 5 years ago, really, when I went to my boss at the time and said, there's this opportunity for us to be a sustainable electricity company. Is this something that we could look at doing? And we didn't really know a lot about it, other than there were so many key performance indicators and so many opportunities to really drive change, because in so many ways, PEI is already a leader from a renewables perspective and wind energy perspective, and just doing an incredible job trying to get there. So how can our colleagues, how can we all work together and do that, but also be really transparent about it and talk about it, and that it is a journey. So that was probably one of the key areas a number of years ago, specifically from a work-related perspective. But just being through all of these storms together with islanders and just seeing the impact that it's had, I think it's just been, I've turned into a real storm watcher, and just trying to understand the impacts. And it takes time to think of Mother Nature and how Mother Nature, you can't fight Mother Nature, and you shouldn't fight Mother Nature, and we have to respect the earth, and we also have to respect what we need to do to be ready. And I think that that's been part of the journey that I've been working on, as well as with many people that I work with every day.
And one of the biggest projects that you've managed before moving into the sustainability role at Maritime Electric is you were the stakeholder relations lead on the undersea cables project. So I think it was 2016, 2017. This is a $142 million project to increase the connectivity between PEI and New Brunswick, and that's an essential part of, I suppose, resilience for the grid here, and to enable growth and to ensure that we're all powered in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about what is involved with stakeholder relations in a project as large as that, and how do you approach consultation and engagement in those sorts of projects?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, for the underwater submarine cables, it's basically our extension cord to New Brunswick, if you will. And That was the largest project to date in our company. And I think it was really interesting as I had just come back off of maternity leave. I think my boys are here today. I've seen them. They're on their best behavior. But I remember coming back from maternity leave, and the project had started. We had ordered some of the cable, and we had this meeting with our engineering team, and they were looking at it from a technical perspective and saying, this is the shortest route, this is the best route, this is the best way to get these underwater submarine cables from Prince Edward Island to New Brunswick. But then as we started to really dig in and look at it and understand who all the stakeholders, that was my job as well as the permitting perspective. And so over time, as you're starting to go and meet the fishers, you're going to meet First Nations communities, chiefs, as well as residents, they were really concerned. They were really concerned about us trenching in the Northumberland Strait, which was the most profitable scallop bed in the area. So we had to work closely with them, and anyone that remembers this project, we had bad weather in October, even though we moved the timing of our project based on stakeholder feedback. We had over 100 meetings with Indigenous people, with elders, with First Nation chiefs, primarily in New Brunswick, because there was a lot of concerns with not only the fishery, but also the land and those discussions and that involvement. And you know, that was very unique for our company to be involved at that level. And I remember just thinking about, it was well beyond the government regulations. It was well beyond what was expected from having this permit to construct your project. It was really about the social license. And for us, it was really important that people were engaged and were part of it. And I probably can't stress enough how many hours we spent connecting with people. Even in Borden Carleton, we had a number of people that were really concerned about the substation. You know, even things like they wanted the color of the rock to match the island's landscape. And I remember one of our engineers, we had a change in the company that was bringing our rocks over, and it wasn't the right color. And I know that may sound silly to some, but to the people in Borden Carleton and to many of the people that we spoke to, it was really important to them. So from an engineering side, we wanted to make sure we had strong, robust rock, but we also wanted to make sure that it matched our landscape. And so some days I wasn't very popular when we had those discussions, but I can tell you that if there were concerns, we just opened up and had a public meeting to talk about it and work through it. And it was a pretty intense year and a half. But I really believe that the cable project really belonged to those communities as well, because they gave us the feedback. And I think of hundreds of fishers that we stood up and talked to them about. We were going to be digging in the strait. We actually had to close down the fishery because of our timing. And we had fishers who were coming in and talking to us about their livelihood. We had to pay them compensation, of course, to help get through the project, get the project done. And I remember at the time, people were really nervous about coming to those meetings because they were robust. This is people's livelihood. This is their family. This is their life. And how do we help them understand that this is a really important project from an energy perspective? And I can tell you specifically, many of the chiefs in New Brunswick were very instrumental in helping us, because even on the permitting side, some of the chiefs actually stood up for us and wrote a letter to the federal government to say, this is a really important energy project, and we really want to energize between our two provinces. And I can honestly say that we never asked anybody to do that. I think people just really were part of our project and really helped us. And to this day, we still connect. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think it's a beautiful demonstration of, when we're working to achieve something, the importance of conversation and truly engaging every stakeholder in an authentic way. So Stephanie, what was the first time that you became engaged in and aware of climate change and your role in it?
I fell into climate change by accident. I was actually working on the other side of the equation. I had a few internships with Imperial Oil, or Esso, and I probably would have seen myself, having my 50-year career there if they hadn't moved from Toronto to Calgary. And so they moved off. It's like, oh, what do I do now? And they bounced around other sort of large corporate places like Procter & Gamble and BASF. And then somewhere in there, I accidentally married an entrepreneur who's in the room today. And his crazy ideas and ventures brought us to the island. And so left the corporate world and like, oh, I'll find a job here. And the job bank told, the options at the time when I looked was line cook and cleaner. And then there was a call for a dermatologist. And the only thing in between those two was managers of the new treatments. And this was about 12 years ago. Actually, his uncle suggested, why don't you look at UPI? Sometimes they have postings just on their website. And I applied to be the office manager of the climate lab. I didn't get it, but they kept my resume on file because they were impressed. Like, yeah, they all say that. But I did get a call and asked, hey, do you want to help us write a funding proposal for a project with the climate lab? And that's how I accidentally fell into climate change. But entering the climate space through an academic institution, very much science-oriented, as you heard from my bio too, studied as an engineer. So that didn't really, that felt like an entry point, but there's so many people along the way that shared their perspectives, whether intentionally on climate or not, that's really changed. That isn't what I would call my role in the climate space. How I got here now were even stories. I actually went to one of the Climate Reality Corps with like one of the Al Gore events, and they had a water keeper come on stage. And she started by saying to the crowd of thousands of people, what have you done for the water today? And it completely changed my mindset. I was like, oh, well, I just assumed that it would be clean and available to me. I never really thought that I had accountability to it. And so there's so many different voices along the way that's really changed how I interact with the climate space and what I feel like my accountability and my duty to the climate space is. And so that's where I feel very comfortable and proud now, and that's now my existing kind of spot and my role in it.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about your work with CLIMAtlantic? I think there are a few people on the island who understand climate impacts better than Stephanie. She was one of the authors of a climate adaptation report for PEI that consulted over 70 people in 10 different industrial sectors. So you talk about impacts on farming, impacts on the fishing industry, impacts on tourism. Like, Stephanie knows this stuff. So if you can catch her after the panel for a discussion, or if there are questions that come, we've probably got a great resource in having Stephanie on the stage here. Tell us about your work with CLIMAtlantic. So what are some of the practices that you're bringing to that work to engage more islanders and island sectors in climate solutions?
Yeah, with CLIMAtlantic, it's a regional Atlantic NGO that was formed specifically to provide free adaptation services. They really thought, in the past, governments have funded tools and resources and like toolkits, but no one was really using them. They're just sitting in like a cyberspace shelf somewhere. So I think people really needed to walk the walk and be on the journey with people trying to figure out, how do we identify risks? How do we manage them? And the way we do it can be really different. Like, we could have taken a very technical approach. We'll help you figure out what data to use, what emission scenarios to think about, what timeline. We could have done that. But CLIMAtlantic has been really getting attention nationally, and it really is fed from the folks on the ground of what they needed. We want you to go beyond the numbers. We want to look at things like resilience in a community. How does adaptation connect to other resilience work in our communities? We want to connect climate action to poverty reduction. We want to connect it to stewardship of the lands and waters. We want it to connect to housing insecurity and food insecurity. And we've really taken up the challenge, and we just have a really great team that is interested in the intersection of all of these things. And it's really gotten the attention nationally of, oh, there's a lot more to do where scientists aren't necessarily the experts in the space, and the people on the ground, people serving their communities, people stewarding the lands, they're the experts. And it's really changed the conversation around who are the experts in adaptation and whose voices do we need in the space. And that's sort of where CLIMAtlantic is, just to help facilitate and create the space, but the people on the ground are doing all the heavy lifting.
Cool. Could you give us an example of one of those projects, and like, who are some of the people on the ground? So.
Yeah, I'll give you one that's sector related that has caught the attention. It's really innovative, but in a maybe quiet way. I just finished a sector adaptation plan for the Federation of Agriculture, and it's innovative because instead of saying, there's so many reasons why a sector level plan is really hard, because all the commodity needs are different size farmers have different needs, but they really looked past the things of, oh, like you have to do these practices, and really download the burden of adaptation to individual farmers. It's like, as a sector, what are some enabling conditions? What are some resources to really empower farmers to do the things that they need? We are hearing that farmers, like, we are confident we can adapt to climate change. What we can't do on our own is all of the other barriers in the way. The things like declining, like thinning margins, increasing input costs, those things are making us make decisions about our farms and fields that we don't want to. We want to do more for the land, but we feel like the ability to do that, the resources to do that, are making us, or forcing us to make bad choices. So as a sector, what can we do to maybe take that pressure off and just kind of spread that burden a little bit further and wider and have more stakeholders involved? And nationally, people have looked to PEI to be like, oh, wait, you consider that adaptation? I thought your plan is a list of farmers' wishes. But we've connected to be like, if you want them to be successful in adaptation, you really have to also be helping them to connect to the day-to-day challenges, helping to meet them so that they can actually plan forward, they can give back to the land, and not make suboptimal decisions because they're forced to.
Great. So it's really about moving beyond blame and judgment and labeling and saying you're doing well or you're not doing well. And it's about saying what are the barriers that you need removed so that you can succeed, because I think everybody wants to do the right thing here. Cool. So Kim, so Stephanie is a specialist in climate adaptation, so changing and adjusting. I think Maritime Electric is an example of a company that both needs to adapt to the changing climate with increased frequency of hurricanes and storms, but you're also on the mitigation side of climate change, so reducing emissions to reduce our impact on future climate. So can you tell us a little bit about Maritime Electric's priorities on sort of both sides of that, adaptation and mitigation?
Sure. So in terms of our grid, it's probably one of the better in terms of non-emitting. It's over 80% on average non-emitting grid, and that may fluctuate. It has a little bit that last year and this year and into the future, and we're taking on more renewables as well. We buy all the wind from PI Energy Corp. We know our customers love wind and want to do as much as they can from a renewable energy as well as rooftop solar perspective as well. So from that perspective, integrating into the grid and still making sure that people have reliable power is our focus. And when we look at climate change and adaptation, we actually released a strategy over a year ago with kind of 17 areas of things that we need to look at. And it's on our website, and we're thinking about climate change very differently in terms of as we're readying our system. When you look at Fiona, our grid was actually very strong. The challenge when we look at, our underwater submarine cables, our transmission, our substations, they held up. What happened were the tens of thousands of trees that came across our island and tore down our poles and masts in people's homes. So when we think on climate change for the future, we're thinking about how are we building our infrastructure for the future, specifically, if we're building in a place that we know is more susceptible, whether it be to flooding, whether it be to an exposed area, are we just going and putting up the same pole again? And we're not. And we're looking at, what are the type of structures that we need to be putting in place to look after our customers. And, we work a lot with UPEI on helping us from a climate change data perspective. We looked out into 2070. We're also looking at things like how are our workers going to, how are we going to help them understand to work in heat? They work in storms, no problem, have lots of winter gear. But as we think about, sadly, the warming temperatures that are happening in our region and in our province, they're going to be working in more hot, humid days. They're going to be working in windier weather conditions. How are we making sure that our power line technicians understand, from a heat perspective? And people say, people will climatize. But when I think about even our own readiness, we are built for winter storms, but we're not thinking about, how are we building for hurricane seasons? How are we building for high winds that are coming, increased heat, flooding? Those are the types of things, and it's not something that you do in 1 month. This is long-term planning. This is 5, 10, 20 years out as you're building infrastructure. So we spend a fair bit of time thinking about that. We're going to have a new update report out this year, just on our progress of what we've been able to achieve and some of the designs that we're looking for into the future.
Great, thank you. I want to ask Melissa about your workshops that you do with young people and with community. And so this is about I suppose you have a practice as an individual artist, but your practice is deeply rooted with family and community. And those workshops that you're doing is sort of spreading the knowledge to others in the community. So can you tell us a little bit about I suppose, the different types of workshops that you do. I've heard you do workshops for the Indigenous community and then also workshops for the non-Indigenous community. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between those two?
Yeah, so I teach quill work workshops to Indigenous communities, mainly Mi'kmaq communities all over Mi'kma'ki. But I also offer the workshop to non-Indigenous people. And the difference between the two workshops is that the non-Indigenous, they're going to get maybe a kindergarten level entry workshop. And that's it. That's it. They don't get how do we harvest our materials. They don't get when we harvest our materials, because that belongs to us, right? So, but even in my workshops with Indigenous communities, I do talk about how to harvest and when to harvest, but I also stress that we need to make sure that we're taking care of what we're harvesting. There's a certain way that you have to harvest a birch bark tree to not damage it. There's a certain time. There's a certain sound. So all of that is shared with my Ilnu community. But also there's a certain step before that, right? They offer that tobacco. They ask for those teach-ins. And it's just not something that can come overnight, right? I wouldn't say, okay, you did this workshop, go in the woods and go get your birch bark, right? So I know how many trees I need to harvest a year that for my whole family. And I will take community out if they wish. It's a pretty heavy couple days when we're harvesting birch bark. But right now, we're not harvesting anymore in Prince Edward Island since Hurricane Fiona. So, but part of the workshops, I'm always letting people know, like, even if it's Indigenous or if it's not Indigenous, I'm like, please don't just go out and harvest. Please ask the right way for that teaching, right? Because there's so much knowledge and just to be out there and harvest that tree correctly. Because in 10 to 15 years, if you do that, if you harvest that tree correctly, in 10 to 15 years, your child is going to be able to harvest from that same tree, right? We want to take care. And that's one of the core values as being Mi'kmaq is Nedagalimk. So that's our way of life. We have the right to access all of these natural materials as long as we take the responsibility to take care of all of these natural materials as well. So whatever we take from Mother Earth, we're also going to give back and take care of her. So there's just the two difference in those two workshops where anybody can put a quill into a piece of birch bark. That I will teach you. But to become a quiller, to become a harvester, to taking care of what we're harvesting and the land, that's totally, it's past grade 12. Past grade 12.
And it's not something you can learn in art school either. Do you want to speak a little about your art school experience?
Yeah, so I started doing quill work in 2011, and I think by 2014, I was like, okay, I need to go to art school. And I visited the art school, and I was like, wow, I'm already beyond what they're teaching, right? And it was off island, and I thought I would have to uproot my family and leave. And there were so many elders in our community that were getting closer to passing on to the spirit world. And it was like art school, or sitting at a table with my elders and learning, or going out in the woods, or sitting by the river, right? So that's the road that I chose. I didn't go to art school. I worked directly with my elders and my teachers and with the children, right? So I just want to acknowledge two Mi'kmaq elders in the room right now, sitting in the front row, Dr. Elder Judy Clark and my mother, Elder Barbara Jadis. They are here today to support and And I'm very grateful that they're here and for their teach-ins. I'm so used to watching them sit up here. It's like a little bit of imposter syndrome. But I just, yeah. And just to acknowledge my way, my journey that I went on with the quills. It wasn't through art school. I don't have a bunch of degrees hanging on my walls, but you know what I have? I have all the elders' pictures, you know, hanging on my walls. And I take care of them and they take care of me. So I'm so grateful that they're here.
I think when I first heard you speak, and in preparing for this panel, I watched some of the speeches or interviews you've given in the past, and one phrase that sort of turned over in my mind was that there are no shortcuts in the work that you do. You know, you can't go to Michael's and buy some pre-dyed porcupine quills and put them into paper instead of birch bark. No, you're harvesting everything mindfully and intentionally and with deep cultural practices, and you're investing in your community over the long term. And I think these are some values that settler culture, the dominant culture, needs to reconsider in our attitudes towards each other and the natural world. Are we taking shortcuts? Are we investing in community, or are we investing in ourselves as individuals? Because I think these are the values that we need if we're going to solve and address the climate crisis. So thank you for sharing those teachings and those lessons. And I think it's a challenge to all of us. How can we be more mindful and more careful and inclusive in the conversations that we're having, not taking shortcuts? And having just come off a federal election campaign, I have to say it, one of the biggest shortcuts that I think was sort of dominant in that election campaign was the idea of building a 7,000 kilometer long pipeline from Alberta to the East Coast, which would negate much of the climate progress that Canada has made over the last many decades. And it seems to be, the Western provinces are feeling alienated, so we should build a $70 billion oil project. And to me, that felt like one of the greatest shortcuts that was not fully considering all of the impacts. And it wasn't an inclusive conversation. It was something very shocking. So I think Canada has much more conversation to have about those sorts of projects. And I think this idea of no shortcuts, it's also showing up in what Kim and what Stephanie are talking about here, the idea of including everybody in the climate conversation. So we've heard a lot about what each of you are working on. I want to speak a little about the future, open up that opportunity. What adaptations do we need to make to prepare for the future? What conversations do we need to have starting now that haven't already been addressed?
Maybe it's not the conversations themselves. I'll answer it a slightly different way, is being able to engage in discourse. It's hard to engage in discourse when you're in a space where you don't have a relationship with each other. You're kind of just guessing. You're hoping you don't hurt someone's feelings. How far can I push this conversation? But when you're with people that you have a connection with, it makes it a little bit easier. And then I think with practice, it makes it a little bit easier. With support around you and other people modeling how productive and respectful discourse can look like, that becomes a little bit easier. So I think that the changes that we need to make is sort of how do we build connection with each other to get there. And sometimes it's not even just about talking. I think sometimes just sharing ideas. And then when you're in a room, when you share different ideas, it creates a new idea because of the people that were there sharing the things that they do. And I think what I've seen of late is art has a really big role in that. There's something about art as a conduit, as an activity that somehow makes it personal, but not personal. I don't know if that makes sense. Art to you is personal, and then when you contribute to ideas and creativity, people don't tend to be defensive about it. People don't tend to be offensive about it. Everyone just has a really deep personal connection, and it manifests in different ways, and that's acceptable and celebrated in art. So maybe if we can figure out how art can play a larger part in helping people who have not been comfortable or don't have the skills in discourse yet to enter them into, like, how do you explain your ideas? How do you accept someone's ideas? And then where can we collectively go from here? I would love to see changes in that way. And I don't know where that'll take us, but I know it's going to take us to new and exciting places that we've not been yet.
Yeah. Beautiful. So instead of debating each other and fighting each other about climate change and trying to figure out which idea should be dominant, it's about creating something new together, coming together and creating an idea that maybe didn't exist before that discussion took place. Beautiful. Kim, what conversations are yet to happen? What are the biggest challenges that you foresee getting to net zero? I know that there are some bold and ambitious goals that the province has and that Maritime Electric has. What do you think are the challenges that we still need to figure out that we don't know how we're going to solve?
I think that's a great question. I think that the province has ambitious goals. I think PEI has always been a leader when you look at the renewable energy piece. I also think we're a leader in the people that are trying to make it happen. And I don't think it's just one solution either. I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot of different points of view around the table with mutual respect. And I think that it is a very polarizing time right now. And I think that that's sad, but I also think that there's opportunity in that, because I think that the one thing we can do is show up like you did this morning and be engaged. And I think that whether it's asking questions to your community, asking questions at home, asking questions to your elected officials, but having your voice heard. And it doesn't mean that you have to be rude or disrespectful or forceful to do so. It feels like there's a movement happening that people really want to get involved and get engaged. And I think to answer that question, I think it's really important for people to think about climate in a different way, that it's not to the scientists and it's not just to the politicians and others, that you really have the opportunity as an individual and as a collective. And I say that because with the storms and events and challenges that are ahead of us, I think improving our energy mix and making sure that it's reliable and making sure that we're prepared for the future. We've seen tremendous growth in the use of electricity. We've seen an incredible growth in people's understanding and activation of how to use those products. But I think that we also have to think about how we're preparing ourselves for the future and making sure that we're resilient and making sure that we're ready in our homes and in our businesses. And I think we were talking yesterday, I was telling you that since December I've been working with one of our sister companies. I've been seconded to work on wildfire mitigation in Alberta, and they asked me to help, which I was really honored to be able to help, because I didn't know anything about wildfires, and quite frankly, give me a snowstorm any day. I find them quite terrifying. But a lot of the same people that helped us in Hurricane Fiona are in Alberta, and I was asking them questions about wildfire, and it's part of they're used to it. They plan for it. They have mitigation, and they have boxes at their door ready to evacuate if they need to. And from a readiness perspective, even when you look at research, still only, I think in their province, only 40% of people felt that they were ready. And we have to take it very seriously. We have to be ready. We have to think about, we're not built for hurricanes from an infrastructure perspective. We can get through winter storms, but when we think about the devastating effect of Fiona, which someone has assured me I'm never going to see another one in my lifetime, but we can't rest on that. I mean, we have to be prepared. And I don't think we, as a community, are the same as a collective getting together anymore. I remember winter storms where, and I'll use Rustico as an example, people would call and say, our community's all getting together, we got our wood stoves, don't worry, do your best to get the power back on. And now as we move to, even in the city, we have lots of new islanders. We have lots of people that may not know how to be and have that redundancy to have another fuel source or have backup ready for if the power goes out or if bad weather comes. And so we have to be thinking, and I think it is our responsibility to help each other, but I also think it's really important and it needs to be part of that conversation. So I think just even showing up this morning and having this dialogue that we've been having for the last day or so is really important. And I think we shouldn't be afraid. I think there's small steps that each of us can make, but I think we have to be part of that voice. And I think it's really important for us to be thinking about it that way and just be engaging. And we can do so in a collective as a community, because we've seen it in storms, and particularly on PEI, we've seen neighbors that help each other. They go knock on doors, they bring them to community centers, they bring them to shelters. We call customers in a storm to let them know when their power might be coming back on or how they're doing, and sometimes we don't get an answer because they're at their neighbors and their neighbors are looking after them. And I sure hope that never changes. I don't see any signs of that changing, but I also think that we as a collective need to make sure that we continue to look out for each other, and to do that, we have to be ready and we have to think about it differently. And so I think this is a great step moving forward.
And I think the last word to Melissa. What are some of the conversations that you would like to see us having as we move forward into the future? What are the changes that need to come?
So one of the, I think, the neat things about our Mi'kmaq culture is our way of life. I think I mentioned this early, Nidigulimk, and that means like it's our way of life, right? That we're going to take care of Mother Earth, and she's going to take care of us. So it's not just a Mi'kmaq core value. I think that's a value for everybody, right? For everybody to think and believe that we need to take care of Mother Earth. Yeah.
That's a great place to conclude our panel discussion. So could you please join me in thanking our panelists? Yeah.